He's an intuitive healer and coach, but he uses EFT to resolve deeply held trauma. And it is a scientifically proven neuroscience, evidence-based technique. And as Steve said, not woo-woo, that's been around and really affects tremendous change with people. And Steve has been doing this for I've worked with him individually on some matters in the past. And I just like the fact that it's accessible. It's not a whole drawn out thing. It's kind of a more user-friendly version of EMDR, which requires a lot more skill set with the practitioner. And it's something that you can do on your own. And we're going to be doing this together tonight. So that's it. I'm done.
That's wonderful.
So
EMDR relates directly to trauma, obvious trauma. What is obvious trauma? Obvious trauma is somebody who's suffering, for example, from post-traumatic stress disorder, which was a term that was coined in the Vietnam War era, where people were coming back traumatized from their war experiences. And what was offered them was counseling, drug therapy, and various different other kinds of integrated social therapies, but really nothing resolved the post-traumatic stress disorder itself. EMDR was not something that was commonly used at the Veterans Administration because they didn't have people who knew how to do it. But 20 so years after the Vietnam era, a group of EFT researchers and trained practitioners invited in a small group of traumatized veterans. And these are people who were not able to be helped by all those other things. And they gave them a series of 12 EFT sessions over a course of 6 days. And 80% of those people regained subclinical health. In other words, they were no longer experiencing post-traumatic stress. And 6 months later and 2 years after that, they maintained those levels. Now, that's basically unheard of because post-traumatic stress is something that's very, very sticky. You don't treat it, it gets worse. It gets worse over time. It affects your family. They become traumatized. So how can something like EFT tapping, which I'll explain a little bit for anybody who's really new at this, completely resolve that? It's neurological. When you expose somebody to what they remember that was traumatic, you're instantly going to have some sort of a response. It's not going to feel very good. As a matter of fact, it could feel so not good that you could literally re-experience the panic, let's say, for lack of a better word, of the traumatic experience itself. So in order to counter condition that experience, we need some sort of somatic input. That means physical input, right? Going into our nervous system, which would tell the brain while it's firing an alarm that it's also safe. And the brain finds a way of balancing out what was a traumatic memory so that the traumatic memory was a traumatic memory, not a traumatic event that's firing the neurons that associated the panic and the distress of that traumatic event in the present. So let's bring that back to our news cycle. So if we're seeing the news cycle and we're watching things, and of course, obviously, I don't think too many of us here are directly impacted by war trauma that we experience directly, being like a combatant, but we're seeing it. We're seeing it in Ukraine, for example. So we can imagine what that must be like. But we've all had some form of trauma in our life, some form of things that were just too difficult to deal with that made an impression, and that impression gets wired into the way the brain fires. So when we see something on the news that bothers us, there might be lots of good explanations of why we're bothered. It's unfair. We feel helpless. There's nothing we can do about it. we feel sorry, we're picking up the energy empathically and it's disturbing us, but it goes deeper than that. It goes to reflections of earlier traumas that we had in our own life. And just because our hometown wasn't blown up and we were forced to be refugees, you know, in our own experience, doesn't mean that we haven't had our own associated with trauma. And that gets neglected in our society. You know, we have, you know, little kid comes home, you know, and he got in a fight with somebody at school. That's traumatic. They might get over it quickly, right? But what did the brain do in terms of registering trauma? So trauma is a very extreme form of stress. And if we don't know how to manage stress, we accumulate trauma-based stress. You know, the thing that sort of registers in the brain as to whether or not this is something that's dangerous or not to me, that I need to be vigilant about, I need to do something about, is checking the same memory boxes as where trauma got stuck. Is this bad enough, like that trauma? And then when we experience trauma when we're 7 years old, you know, an adult might say, well, that's not really trauma. But what does a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or even a 7-year-old do when their whole life is destroyed because somebody they liked said something terrible to them? The brain really doesn't understand. It doesn't have the ability. We don't use our cognitive awareness to say, all right, that's something I'm going to get over with. It registers in the brain because the brain, we're wired. We're wired for survival. You know, so if avoiding stress and avoiding trauma is something that we do that makes us feel better, because if we expose ourselves to too many disturbing things, it would be too distressing for us. That's our strategy for avoiding the things that we know would be too distressing. What does that mean to be too distressing? So what's our resilience level? How much distress can we take in? Because news can sometimes be very important without getting overwhelmed to the point where we want to turn it off. So what's the problem with being overwhelmed? So, you know, we can get overwhelmed and say, oh, this is terrible, and we blow it off. We don't understand, because we're not trained, most of us, to understand that we're activating those old stress response mechanisms, which are tied into trauma, and it's all happening the same thing. The difference is, how disturbed do we get by a thought or a feeling or a memory or something that's happening to us now? And that's what we want to watch. Somebody said, it might have been Kim, number one, or Kim, but I don't know. Somebody said, yeah, you have to know yourself well enough to understand what that balance level is. But we're so used to managing stress in our lives, even without the news, just our personal life. We're so used to managing stress that we don't necessarily pay attention to what actually is the cause of our stress level and how much stress level we can actually handle before stress becomes a problem that interferes with our emotional regulation system, which is going to have an impact upon how we see the world and what we can do with our cognitive abilities to be able to do something positive. Because the more stress we're under, the more we're cognitively compromised. And that could lead to all kinds of other stressful situations. So I'm going to stop from there, and I want to see what people have as far as questions or comments about what I just set up for us here.
Can I just ask a question to clarify? Because I love this idea. What I think you said is our stress responses now don't have to directly go back to a similar trauma when we're little. It's that the stress response is there regardless. And so that's what gets ticked off now from before. It's actually a mechanism. It's not the memory has to be the same at all.
Yeah, Kim.
Okay, thank you. That was great.
That's true. We don't necessarily realize, here's a key point, we don't necessarily realize that the thing that we're experiencing now that's getting us upset, the fact that we're getting upset is tied to earlier events that got us upset, or might even be getting upset might be a reaction to having our traumas being re-triggered. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Right.
I'm just
So
wondering, how far back does it go?
it goes back, well, it goes back as far as it goes back.
Yeah.
It can go back pre-verbal because, you know, the brain doesn't know that you don't have language to talk up to describe what this trauma is, but it recognizes trauma. So
Yeah.
it goes back far. So we're not all expert energy psychologists and psychologists in general. So we're not going to necessarily know where the trauma comes from. In some cases, we might know where the trauma comes from because it was very obvious. And in other cases, it requires a coach to be able to work with somebody and ask pointed questions about what they're experiencing as a traumatic event now and how it relates to them in terms of what they feel about it, what they think about it. And if they can get in touch with those feelings might be somatic enough that they can actually feel it in the body. And if you really tune your awareness into what your emotional and somatic experience is, it might seem familiar. It might remind you of something that happened to you when you were 11 or 7. And then when we work at that level and start to tune into what we remember that might have been traumatic from a long time ago, you will be able to feel the emotional intensity or the energetic disruption that's connected to that event. So when we then counter condition that, now that we've set up a pattern that the brain is firing, you know, the same feelings and sensations that it experienced and it had to deal with when that trauma was happening. When we start tapping on the body using a system like EFT, we're now counter conditioning the stress response that we're experiencing now from a previous event. And it literally extinguishes the stress response that was wired in from that event, even that event was 50 years ago. And when we do that completely and thoroughly, we can resolve that level of stress from the original trauma. And that's how the EFT practitioners were able to resolve PTSD in those war veterans. They literally sat them down and saying, what bothers you? And then they started tapping on everything that bothers you. But then they knew they had to go back to the point of trauma. All of those people knew that they were fine before the war and they weren't fine after the war because the war contained very specific, identifiable traumatic experiences. But when you're 2 or you're 3, who remembers those? So at least they knew what they were working with. And then one of the vets might have said, well, you know, it's too difficult to talk about. So the fact that it's too difficult to talk about is already an emotional reaction. That becomes a new problem. And we start to address, even though these traumas are too difficult to talk about, I deeply and completely love and accept myself, which is the basic setup for EFT tapping. And then all of a sudden, well, if you were to tell me about it, how distressing would you think it would be on a scale of 0 to 10? And now all of a sudden the answer is, well, it's off the charts. It's like a 10 times 10, right? So you know that the expectation is it's there. And then you start to gently move your way towards the problem without reactivating the problem by counter conditioning just the fact that if you were to think about how horrible all these things were, you would be emotionally overwhelmed. So you say, even though it's too difficult to even talk or think about those terrible things that happened, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And now you're counter conditioning your way in. And just by thinking about the disturbing event and tapping, you're immediately starting to make it a little bit more okay to talk about the traumatic event because we're now counter conditioning the response. What most people aren't aware is that as soon as you think about something that's distressing, your energy system shifts immediately. So when you do meditation and when you do positive affirmations and when you do feel good stuff, your brain is firing on a set of cylinders that is completely different than what happens when you tune into something that you remember that's distressing or something that's distressing happening right now. So it's an instant energetic shift. So with EFT, we expose ourselves. EFT is this tapping method that we're going to talk about. We expose ourselves to the memory of the problem or what it is that's upsetting us in the moment as we think about a problem. Because we want the brain to fire in that dysfunctional way so that when we do the tapping energetic input, it corrects it and it diminishes it. So we take something that's very, very distressing on a scale of 0 to 10 that might be up there like a 9 or a 10. And if we can safely experience that while we're tapping through the EFT tapping points, that intensity of that stimulation is going to start to drop. And when we go back and think about the event, something that we said was an 8 or a 9 might start to come down to a 4 or 5. And if we keep going, we might be able to bring it down to a 2 or a 1 or even a 0. So if
But how would, I'm so sorry, but
Yeah, no, go ahead.
how would something like that actually tap into something that's more buried? I don't
Well,
get it.
it's all wired. The brain makes the connection. Because when you're upset, the energy of you being upset isn't about the thing you think you're upset about.
Right.
The fact that you're upset is already wired to everything else that ever has upset you.
Hmm.
So the more we find specific things that remember that upset us, and we energetically correct for it, the more we're actually tapping into that root of things that we might not remember. So if it wasn't about the news cycle, if it was some other problem that we have, that seems to be a consistent problem that we have in our life and the way we deal with trauma and stress, we have to try to find the kind of things that bother us. So for the purposes of this workshop, we're looking at what's happening currently in the news cycle or things we remember over the last couple of years in the news cycle that particularly bothered us. And when we start tapping on that stuff, we're also counter conditioning a lot of things that connect to it. And it becomes safer to get at the parts of the stuff that happened before, or maybe even the parts of the stuff that we didn't remember until all of a sudden, now that we're tapping on this problem, that feels very similar to something that happened a long time ago, we might not remember, all of a sudden we actually might remember it. And if we need, and even if we don't, the energy is still there. So we know that we have this process where we can feel the intensity of something that disturbs us in the moment. And as we're tapping on it, not only are we reducing that, but we've got a connection to prior events that were stressful and possibly originated from life trauma, developmental trauma.
So when
Good
you're
question.
tapping, are you thinking about trauma?
No, we're not thinking about trauma. We're thinking about the effect of trauma. So I want to give a quick demonstration of how tapping works so you can understand it a little bit, because we're going to start to tap, and then I'm going to maybe talk to Deb, and I had talked earlier about something that might be useful as a demonstration. But since we are all connected, as Barbara said, if I tap on her problem, let's say she had an uncle that was mean to her and beat her when her parents weren't around, right? So, and Kim, your uncle was this great guy that you loved. And we tap on Deborah's mean uncle, you know, it might not mean anything to you, but it might relate on another level because there might be other things that you experience. So your subconscious is smart enough to figure that out. And as Barbara said, we're all kind of connected empathetically, and we have something called mirror neurons, which sort of match what we're experiencing. You know, when we watch the TV and we see these horrible people hiding in the basements in the Ukraine, you know, for you not to have any reaction to that means you've either had to go mentally dead. Those of us who do are, you know, are mirroring their experience into possible things that we can relate to, or we can be putting ourselves in that situation. So as we tap along all together, the fact that we're tapping is giving us positive input. And that positive input tends to counter condition the stress, even if it's unconscious to you. You will tend to feel better. So I need to give a basic example of what tapping is, and then set up a situation where we can all tap and then see what happens. And then you'll see what happens if I decide to go a little bit deeper into one particular person's story about how stress is affecting them. Is that okay with everybody?
Mhm.
Okay, so who is completely new and doesn't know anything about EFT tapping, emotional freedom techniques? Okay, Deborah, you're perfect. Okay, good. Everybody else has an idea what it is? Okay, all right, so tapping is tapping on the body. See what I'm doing here?
Mhm.
I'm finding an acupressure point, and these are pretty predefined, and everybody's got the same ones, and they're pretty much in the same place. So I want to point out where the points are, and all you need to do is follow along with me when we do this, and you'll get the idea. So there's a point on the beginning of the eyebrow, right where the eyebrow sort of meets the bridge of the nose, in the upper inside corner of the eye socket, right there. And when you tap, you take 2 fingertips like that, and you tap like this. This is sort of like, instead of inserting needles, we're stimulating the same process that a needle might stimulate. We're just using a different process called tapping. So this is sort of a form of emotional acupuncture. But with acupuncture, just putting needles in. With EFT, we're thinking about something that's disturbing or distressing, and we're tapping to clear energy or to signal our brain specifically on an idea that's upsetting. So we tap here and we say this upsetting thing. We use language to reinforce the fact that we're intending to correct the energy of a certain disruption. When you feel disturbed about something, there might be lots of intelligent reasons why you're feeling that disruption. But really what we're doing is we're addressing the energy that is disturbed by bringing this distressing idea to mind. So it's an energetic technique. It's a mind-body technique. So here's the first part. It's the eyebrow point right there. And the next point we're going to tap on is right on the outside corner of the eye socket, right on the bone there. That's the outside eye, side of the eye point. And then at the top of the bone, just on the eye socket there, right underneath your pupil. That's the under eye point. And then there's a point underneath the nose right here. All right. And then if you drop straight down below the lip, the lower lip, we're tapping on the chin point, not the point of the chin, but the chin point, which is on the flat spot of the chin underneath the lip. And the next point we're going to tap on is called the collarbone point. And the collarbone point is this big bone that attaches your shoulder to the middle of your chest. If you put your finger right at the top of your sternum, right in the sternal notch right there, and you move down in either direction about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, you're going to feel your finger roll off the end point of the collarbone.
Mm.
So right under there, right in here, here's my collars. If I had button down shirt, the buttons would probably be right there. So right in there is where we're tapping, and you can just take a bunch of fingertips and tap that whole point right there. Okay. There's a point that we want to tap that we call the underarm point, which is really on the side of the ribs. But if I lift my arm up, reach across and tap on the side of the ribs about 4 inches below the center of my armpit right there, because it's underneath my arm, it's called the underarm point. All right. And there are other points of importance in certain situations, but the most important point is the point that we start with. And that point is on the side of the hand right here, just about 1.5 inches below the knuckle of the little finger on the side of the hand. Some people call this the karate chop point because people used to like make an X and karate chop their karate chop points together. So we can do it simply this way. And when we do EFT,
is that the most important point you say?
it's the most important point because that's where we start. We start to set up the rest of the tapping by tuning in to what the problem is. And this is where EFT uses exposure therapy to get us in touch with the problem. If we tap on something and it's no big deal, we might actually just feel better because we've created a relaxation response, because just by tapping through these points, we're sending calming signals into the nervous system, which will counter condition a stress response.
Oh,
That makes sense?
yeah.
But when we focus on
Steve?
yes,
I have a question. So you think the karate chop isn't better than you used to had a different way of doing it? You said people used to do the.
no, don't worry about the technique. It's the
Okay.
tapping that's important. Yeah, this is not,
This is okay or
you
not?
you can't do this while you're driving a car.
I wouldn't be doing it
You
while I was
can, you can
driving a
put your
car.
hands on the wheel and you can do this. This is what everybody does now. Okay? Yes, this is fine. This works.
Okay.
But what we're doing here is something that's very special. We're setting up what it is that we're tapping about. All right. So we need to tune in to what the problem is. So for example, say you have a snake phobia, right? You're not walking around every day, looking under the table and the chair for snakes in your house, because there's probably no snakes in your house, unless you live out in the country, and then you might be doing that, and then you need help. If you're sitting here in White Plains in an apartment and I have a snake phobia, I don't expect that I need to be worrying about snakes in my house. But if somebody said, Steve, we're going to come and we're going to work on your snake problem, and they brought in a snake in a cage, I might say, you can come in, but leave the snake outside, please. Because as they expose me to the snake, my stress levels are going to go up. So that's exposure therapy. Psychologists use exposure therapy to try to get you to experience the stress reaction from exposing you to what the problem is, whether it's fear of heights or spiders or snakes or flying or anything else, just so that you can experience that stress without taking you to the level where you're so stressed out that you can't still realize that you're still safe. So when you start tapping here, this is a signal to the brain that says, I'm safe. So I say, even though this snake is closer to me than I feel comfortable, I know it's still in a cage and I'm okay. The way we set this up with EFT is the basic EFT setup statement. We think about something that upsets us. Even though when I see those people cowering in the basement, worried about if a bomb is going to kill them, it stresses me to no end. That would be a definition of a problem. I deeply and completely love and accept myself. So we're adding a statement that suggests that even though this terrible thing is happening, there's still a sense that I'm still here. The world hasn't completely fallen apart yet. Now, somebody might say to you, what do you mean the world's not falling apart? Of course it's falling apart. Look everywhere, it's falling apart. That person is obviously responding to the way they see the world falling apart, and that could be very stressful for them. Everybody here knows the difference between when somebody is talking and they're making sense and somebody's talking and they're emotionally excited. So that emotional excitement is a clue that they are already involved in the problem. So we need a way of getting involved in the problem. So we have to identify what the problem is. So for the purpose of what we're going to do in this learning exercise is just to recognize that we start tapping on the side of the hand and we come up with a simple definition of the problem. Even though I'm too upset to watch the news all the time, I deeply accept myself. Even though I feel helpless when I see all those people being attacked by an insane madman, I deeply accept myself. Even though I feel guilty because there's nothing I can really do to make any real change in the world, I deeply and completely accept myself. Are you starting to get the idea of how we start to language the beginning of this? So let's have some questions about things that we can use to put into our setup statement. Who's got some ideas?
I have a question about habits.
Habits?
A habit that I don't like. That, for example, yes.
Yeah.
A habit that
Okay.
upsets me. So that would be something. I
Okay.
would- yeah,
All right.
That's all.
Well, Kim, that's a good point, and that's a good way of using EFT. But because we are focusing EFT on our reactions to the news cycles, I'll just address your question really quickly.
Okay. Okay.
You would stop by saying, even though I have this habit I don't like, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I don't know how to stop this habit and I don't like aspects of who I am because I have this habit, I'm still a reasonable person that some people care about and love. You can say things like that. But the default statement is I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I have this habit I don't like, even though I have this habit I can't get rid of, even though I've tried everything in the world and I still have this habit, I deeply and completely accept myself. And Kim, what's that doing is it's starting you to get in tune with your reaction to the habit and the way you judge yourself about the habit. If we were going to work together, I said, well, tell me a little bit, don't do it now. Tell me a little bit about the habit and why it bothers you. So as we tap on all the reasons it bothers you, I can't get rid of it. Why does that bother you? Well, if I can't get rid of it, I feel out of control. Where does that come from? You know, and we can keep going and going and going and going. But the simple tapping mechanism is notice whether or not I have this habit I don't like. On the scale of 0 to 10, how much does this bother you right now? And do me a favor, just so we can all learn from this. Don't tell us what the habit is. Just tune into the fact that this is a problem for you and guess on a scale of 0 to 10 how disturbing it is to have this problem.
I'd say 9.
Yeah, that's big. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So we would first have to start by, even though I have this habit that I don't like, that's a 9, I deeply accept myself. And that's how we set up a tapping script. Make sense? Who's got other suggestions for things that we can set up like that with a tapping? Deb, this is new for you. What do you think?
Overeating?
All right, so what's the problem with overeating?
I mean, many things.
Oh, yeah, pick one.
I can't fit in my clothes.
Does it bother you to fit in your clothes?
It bothers me not to fit in my clothes.
Why? Well, you just go out, you know, open the clothes up, don't wear clothes, buy new clothes. What's the problem?
Oh.
How does it make you feel every time you try to get in the clothes and you can't really fit in them?
Very well. I'd feel
Yeah.
very.
Do you see there could be an emotional reaction there if we went down that line, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, of course. So even though
I
I'm
started
upset because I
judging
can't fit in my clothes, I deeply accept myself, is a valid starting point. But you can see it won't take long before we'll kick up a lot of the thoughts and feelings that are connected to that idea. Got it? So it's very, very good. You understand? Barbara, you have anything you want to contribute to this?
No, I'm just listening and
Lisa, anything? Oh, I'm not hearing you, so we have to ask you to unmute. Hit your space bar or click your unmute button.
So I don't have anything that I want to contribute right now. Just listening.
Okay, so just keep it in the back of your mind as we tap. Don't share anything with us personally, but just imagine that if we were working directly with you in a session, that we would be addressing some of your concerns.
Mhm.
All right. So for the moment, let me ask you a general question. Is the idea that the news cycle is kind of stressful and even traumatic something that concerns you?
Yes.
So just keep your thoughts and feelings on the upsetting things that we see in the news.
Okay.
And since you seem to be safe doing that, we'll just leave it at that. And our other Kim, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm listening, and I'd like to understand more of the tapping.
No, don't focus on that. It's very, very simple. We're just tapping on an acupuncture point.
Right. No,
The acupuncture point is here. It doesn't matter if you tap like this, if you tap like that, if you tap like that, if you
No.
tap like this.
No.
It's the stimulation of the acupressure point that is doing the work.
No,
Okay, so
get
2 or 3 fingers on the stimulation point is all you need to do. Okay. Now,
Here's one more.
what would you tap on if you wanted to tap on an issue?
me
It's more important to put language towards the idea of something that is upsetting to you or stressful to you. That's what we're focused on.
So are you asking me what language or where would
I'm
I?
asking you if you have something that you want to contribute that would be something that we would tap on. If we
I
would tap
see.
on something that would be distressing to you regarding all of this stuff, all this news cycle stuff.
All the news.
Yeah.
Regarding Ukraine,
Anything you like. What bothers you?
what bothers me is abuse.
Can you be more specific about the
Yeah,
abuse?
women being abused, children being abused, dogs.
Because of the
being
war?
abused. What?
Because of the war or in general?
No, in general, abuse.
Yeah,
It
okay,
bothers me tremendously. Like,
okay. So is it fair to say that the abuse bothers you tremendously when you see examples of it?
or when I hear about it.
Well, yeah, okay, well, hear or see examples of it, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're tapping, we'd be saying, even though I'm upset because of all the abuse I see and hear in the world, I deeply accept myself. We want to use language that actually makes sense to our mind, that
Okay.
we're using language to represent what this problem really is for us. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yes.
Deborah, you were going to say something?
Sleeplessness. I have nothing but broken sleep ever since this all, well, even before this, but probably since COVID. I don't know.
So ever since COVID, so something about COVID created enough stress that was causing you to lose good
Broken
sleep.
sleep.
Is that true?
Lots of broken sleep, not straight through sleep.
Right. Okay. So if we went down that path, we would have to go back and start to see what was happening during that time, the amount of stress that you were experiencing, taking in all this information about COVID. Maybe you even had a personal experience with it. But you can say that even though I have this sleep problem ever since COVID, I deeply and completely accept myself. Okay, so I took that language, almost the same language, just put it in a simple phrase. Even though I can't figure out how to get over the sleep problem, I deeply accept myself. Even though COVID impacted me so much that I'm losing good sleep because of it, I deeply accept myself. So we're languaging the problem as lack of sleep being the problem, but we know that it was the stress because of the COVID situation began this.
Yeah.
Because how many of us have ever experienced, a pandemic like this in our lifetime before? Right? So it was very, very stressful for many, many people for many, many valid reasons. Okay, so this is important. So let's take abuse. All right. And let's tap and say, let's all tap along. Substitute whatever you like as your own personal thing right now. And just for learning sake, we'll see how the actual method of tapping works and what to do and what to say. So I'm going to use the example of how I feel about abuse of women and children, innocent people, defenseless people,
And
even
dogs.
though it upsets me terribly that I know that there's all this abuse towards women and children and other unfortunate populations. And I can add language. I could say, it breaks my heart. It's overwhelming. I can't, I wish there was something I could do to stop it. And I can't help but making this an important issue. And it really is stressing and it's really upsetting, okay? Even though I'm stressed and upset about all the abuse, I deeply and completely accept myself. This is our setup statement. And you can tap along with those exact language, or you can substitute in your own mind your own language. But if I was working in a group setting like I am, or with an individual like Kim, I would have her repeat that out loud while she was tapping on the side of the hand. So Kim, even though I'm really upset about all the abuse,
Even though I'm really upset about all the abuse,
I deeply, completely love and accept myself, even though there's not much I can personally do about it.
I deeply accept and love myself, even though there's nothing I can.
Does that sound like a
Not much I
reasonable
can
language
do.
for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to repeat that 2 more times. Even though all the abuse really bothers me on a deep personal level.
Even though all this abuse really bothers me on a personal, deep level,
I deeply and completely accept myself.
I deeply am committed to accept myself.
Now we're going to do this one more time, but I'm going to ask you if there's anything else you could say about why it's so upsetting to you, is there anything else you want to add at this point?
I think because people are, and animals are vulnerable, and I don't like seeing people that are hurt and bullied.
Is anybody thinking what I'm thinking? Is it possible that you have empathy for other people, not just animals that were hurt and bullied by bullies?
Absolutely. Yes.
It might even be that you have your own experiences that you can directly relate to what it's like being bullied.
Actually, not really. I've just seen so much of it.
Right.
I really haven't.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. I'm glad. So let's not make presumptions. But when we do this in a clinical setting, there might be underlying reasons why this bothers you. So we tap and we say that, even though I'm really upset by all the abuse I see in the world, and it bothers me to no end, even though I'm fine.
Right.
I deeply and completely accept myself. Now, if you were to rate right now, if I asked you to tell me, if you think about the last time you saw or heard about abuse of an animal or a person, how upset you were by it, can you recall anything in particular?
Well, to see the commercials regarding abused dogs.
Oh my God, yeah, they know exactly when to put them in. Oh yeah, I have to eventually have to turn the TV off.
Right.
You know what I do when I see those commercials? I immediately start going through the tapping points.
Okay.
Because I'm counter conditioning myself, because it's not that I don't want to see it, but how much can you see of it? It's how many animals can you rescue?
Right.
You know, so there's nothing you can do. So to keep yourself from getting overstimulated, because the more you see it and you don't do anything, the more upset you're going to get, and the more stress level you're going to accumulate. I tap.
Yes.
And I'll tell you a story that might be related a little bit to Deborah in a little while. Okay, so we've tapped and we've set this problem up. Even though I get really upset when I see the abuse of animals, I deeply and completely accept myself. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tap through all the other points in sequence so you see how this works. And the first point we're going to start tapping, and everybody tap, on the eyebrow point, and either say out loud or to yourself your own thing that you're focused on, what's upsetting you. And in this particular case, we're going to say all this abuse. Say it out loud, because this is a reminder phrase that keeps us focused on what it is that we're addressing. All this abuse.
All this abuse.
Side of the eye, all this abuse.
All this abuse.
Yeah, so you want to shift. You keep your eyes open so you can watch me. Yeah, now we're tapping on the side of the eye. All this abuse.
All this abuse.
All this abuse.
Yeah, underneath the eye point right there. All this abuse.
All this abuse.
Underneath the nose, all this abuse.
All this abuse.
All this abuse.
On the chin, all this abuse.
All this abuse.
Collarbone point, all this abuse.
All this abuse.
Underneath the arm point, all this abuse.
All this
All this
abuse.
abuse.
All right, side of the hand point, all this abuse.
All this abuse.
Over here. Yeah. And there's also a point right in the middle of the top of the head that some people like to tap on to end or to start tapping, all this abuse.
All this
All
abuse.
this abuse.
Now, Kim, I'm going to suggest that if we were to talk about this, we would have to get to a point where I actually got you to feel how much disturbance there was when you think about watching those commercials, and then we would tap several rounds, and you would just happen to notice whether or not your disturbance level went down. This is never going to be something that doesn't bother you. The question is, what is your stress reaction level every time you see it? So if we were to tap a few more times, you might notice that as you think about it, even though the idea is still a part, your immediate stress reaction isn't as high. And that's what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does everybody understand the basic recipe?
Yeah.
Okay, we think about something that we want to focus on, something that we know that would bother us if we really started talking about it, thinking about it. We start a meeting, and if we said, let's do some EFT, we tune in to notice exactly how it is that we feel when we think about this, what's disturbing us about this, so that we can sense our disturbance. if you're angry about something, all those people that said, don't be angry, how can you not be angry about something you're angry about, right? So if we're tapping on something, even though I'm really angry about this, or if you're sad about something, oh, don't feel sad. It'll be okay. Feel better. Does that work? No, if you're sad, you're sad. Even though I'm sad about this, I deeply accept myself. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be sad. It's just you recognize that sadness might be a stress response that is not ultimately something that you desire. You might want to let go of some of the sadness so that you might be able to raise your energies back up. Okay. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of everyday examples that we can use that describe ways that we're stressed and disturbed by things, experiences, ideas, things that we are sucking in like a news cycle. So if we were going to work on the news cycle, we would start tapping and saying, even though there's too many things in the news that are upsetting, and it's hard for me to find my balance in this world as I try to raise my energies and be a spiritual person and overcome the difficulties of trying to contemplate exactly what all this means and how it relates to me. Well, that's a lot of words, but you know, if you're that kind of person who thinks that way, that's the kind of language you use. Otherwise, we can all agree. Can we all agree that there's things in the news that are upsetting, and we've all talked about them already, right? All right. So let's just tap a few rounds and just notice if the thing we think about, the last thing we saw in the news that bothered us the most, has dropped its intensity when we think about it after we tap. So I'm not going to ask everybody again what it is, but just in your own mind, think about something that you saw that bothered you recently in the news, right? And if you have a piece of paper, just write down what it is, and I'm going to call, mine is going to be the cats in Shanghai. And guess at what your overall level of disturbance still is now, if you were to guess at it on a scale of 0 to 10, how strong a disturbance is still there?
I'm afraid to know what the hell they did this time. I didn't even hear about this one yet.
Well, they separated en masse everybody in Shanghai from their animals, you know, as a reaction to their rise in COVID
Got it.
cases. Now, I don't want to tell you because it's traumatizing if you don't know. Just say it wasn't good. All right.
I bet it was.
It's upsetting. It's upsetting to me. So my reaction is it's upsetting. On a scale of 1 to 10, my upsetting number is a 6. So does everybody have something that they can tune into? Or if not, just play along. Okay. So notice what it is and write your number down. And let's tap, okay? Ready? Even though I have this, in my case, I'll call it upsetting. Disturbance. Now, I'm not even giving language. I know what it is. You know what yours is. Even though I'm distressed about the cats in Shanghai. Even though I'm distressed about the war. Even though I'm stressed about the finger pointing in politics. Even though it scares me that there's a madman in Moscow. Even though I'm distressed about all the abuse towards innocent victims. Even though there's 100 things that would get me upset if I really thought about them right now, I still deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though there's too many things to think about that are stressful. When I think about this one particular issue, I can feel my level of stress. I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though there are all these things that are happening, especially since COVID and the news cycle around all of that, that are very distressing. I deeply and completely accept myself. All right, so with that all said, now let's start tapping on the eyebrow point. All these distressing things, side of the eye, my distress beneath the eye, all the ways I think and feel about this distressing issue. Beneath the nose. How can the world function with all of these terrible things that are happening? On the shin point. How is it there's really nothing I can do to change anything? On the collarbone point. Maybe it's better not to watch the news. It's too distressing. Beneath the arm. Maybe some people are too addicted to the news. Side of the hand. Maybe I don't want to see the news at all, just to keep my okayness intact. And then start tapping on the top of the head. All the ways I feel distressed about this. Eyebrow point. All the ways this distresses me. Side of the eye. All the ways I can't do anything about the thing that distresses me. Beneath the eye. All the ways that distress is impacting my mind and my body and my overall sense of okayness. Beneath the nose. All the ways that the stress of this situation can negatively affect my health. Chin. And my mental well-being. Collarbone. And my spiritual balance. Beneath the arm. All the ways these things negatively affect me. Side of the hand. Even though there are so many things in the news cycle that distress me, I deeply, completely love and accept myself. Okay? And what I like to do at this point is I like to put my hands over my heart space. And I feel the energy there, and I take in a breath. Imagine that you can breathe as if you've got a nose and a mouth right there at the center of your heart. Breathe energy into your heart space. And here you can close your eyes if you like, and then breathe energy out of your heart space. So these are designed to sort of regulate our stress response system. So here's a little experiment. Go back now and evaluate the thing that you started to tap on, and look at your number and see if your number has gone down. I'll share a little personal thing. Yeah, okay. So I was thinking about the poor cats, and I started off as a 6. And after tapping on it, I'm envisioning the thing that upset me the most that I saw. And my distress level is at a 0 to 1. And right away, my first thought was, well, that's not good. That thing really bothers me. But it bothers me as an idea. The distress level of the thing that bothered me is no longer at a 6. I was going to put a 1 because I didn't want to put a 0, but the actual number is a 0. It's still terrible, but it's just a thing that I saw. How many people's number went down by 2 or more? Did anybody's number go down to a 0? Kim, not you. Don't worry about it. Did anybody's number go down to a 0?
I
Just
didn't
checking.
use numbers, but I just feel the whole feeling of it just depressed.
Okay, that's the most important thing to understand, Deborah, because that's your personal experience of how tapping shifted that problem just in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the problem went away. It means your distress level about the problem is diminished that quickly. So if every time you re-experience the problem and it worried you, you tap on the problem again, and it will continue to bring that stress level down and down and down. And what we see with continuous application of EFT is sometimes the problem that you're distressed about actually goes away. Now, when you think about world events, if I tap because I'm upset about Russia invading Ukraine, we don't expect Russia to stop invading Ukraine. Those of us who are metaphysical might know, okay, if I stop focusing on what's bad and I might be able to start envisioning what's good, maybe it'll have a cause and effect. But that's not what we do with clinical EFT. With clinical EFT, we're working on the neurological connection to the memory of trauma that is affecting our experience in the moment of stress. And then we know that the more we bring down something that stresses us down to a zero, the more resilience we have to manage stress in our day-to-day lives. And that's what this workshop is all about. Does that make sense?
Very cool.
We have a little time, and Deborah and I had talked about something that was a stress reaction. And if you guys are interested, I'm going to do a little mini session with Deborah and see where this goes. And every time we start tapping because there's a sense of distress that comes up, I just want everybody to tap along with our tapping. Okay? And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for question and answers. Barbara, how are we doing for time? Are we okay?
We have till 8:30.
Okay. Let's do it quickly.
We might, it might not shut off, so we could go till 8:40, I think.
I just want to make sure that people don't have to just drop out right in the middle of this. But before we do that, is there any other questions that I can answer about what just happened? So anybody who does got to drop out, you know, gets something.
I just have a quick question. What is this tapping, which we just did on these pressure points, is that different from body tapping?
Yes, it's totally different.
Totally different.
Totally different. The stimulation might be similar, but with clinical EFT, we know that tapping on these acupuncture meridian endpoints in a systematic way resolves an emotional and psychological problems to the extent that we have clinical evidence that working this way does. So, and we also have evidence that shows if you tap on points that aren't these acupuncture points, that doesn't necessarily do the same thing. That doesn't mean that tapping in other points couldn't be helpful, but we have no actual clinical evidence that we know that it works the way it works.
Okay.
So we want to tap on these exact points. And if you need to see exactly how that works, if you can get back to Barbara or me, I can send you a little bit more information about this. But that was a very, very good question. It's not just about the tapping, it's about tapping on the acupuncture points in sometimes in certain sequences. But with EFT, we have a very simple way of memorizing, you know, how we go through the points. And
I asked that because after I do body tapping, I feel really good.
yeah, well, body tap, me too. Lots of times I'll do body tapping for a lot of different reasons, because it has like a qigong effect.
Yes.
So you're still mobilizing energy. It's just that with clinical EFT, we have evidence that people who tap this way resolve trauma.
Okay.
Okay. Deborah, you said something very interesting about your reaction to something. And would you mind talking about that a little bit?
When there was the event in Brooklyn with the train and this person who just took off on everybody, and they were trapped in the train, and he shot 31 bullets into the train and injured 28 people by doing that. And I don't know what happened to me. I just started to cry, and you know, I felt, you know, I moved out of Harlem and the city that I know and love all my life, and I moved here in November to get away from all of that. And I always felt that, you know, I was feeling trapped being there with everything going on with COVID, with everything going on with other things that happened even before then. So I don't know. And I could still feel it rising up just thinking about that.
Right. So notice what it feels like to feel it rising up just thinking about it. Got that? Now here's the tricky part. How do we put language to that? So let's all tap along. Even though I still feel this disturbing energy rising up just thinking about these problems, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I was surprised at how deeply disturbed I was by a recent news event, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though there was this train shooting on the news, 31 bullets fired into a train, 28 people injured. Even though I moved away from the city because I felt trapped there because of COVID, and I still feel these energies arising in me, even just thinking about it, I deeply and completely accept myself. So we're going to tap now. Watch, tap on the top of the head and focus on these energies arising. And now eyebrow point, these energies arising. Side of the eye, energies arising. Underneath the eye, keep your eyes open there, Deb. Energy arising. Once they focused, being present on the chin, because you already feel the energies, right? On the collarbone, energies arising. Collarbone point, energies arising. Underneath the arm point, energies arising. Side of the hand point, energies arising. Now I'm going to lead you through another tapping process that is part of clinical EFT, but most people skip it because they don't go too deeply to feel those kind of energies. But if we tap on the back of the hand right here, in the space between these two bones that connect the wrist to the knuckles of the pinky finger and the ring finger, right in that spot, and we're focused on those energies that are arising, which are representatives of the energies of the distress that you feel from all of these related events, right? Tapping there is what I want you to do. While you're tapping on this distress, close your eyes, keep tapping, and then open your eyes, looking straight ahead, keep tapping, and then take your eyes and move them hard down to one side so that you're like looking at the top of your shoulder without turning your head, like this. Hard down to the lower, this right side here. Move your eyes that way. Yep. Take your eyes and move them in your head to look down over there. Good. Move your eyes further to the side and down. That's it. Now move them to the other side, down hard to the other side. That's right. Now watch how I move my eyes in a big circle up and around over the top of my head, and down the other side. So move your eyes in a big circle. That's it. Now reverse directions, up and around all the way. Keep tapping. Keep going. Keep moving your eyes. Keep moving your eyes. There you go. Now, while you're still tapping, think of a tune that you can hum out loud, like row, row, row your boat, right? Sounds like this. Ready? Go ahead. Hum, please. Are you humming? I'm having a hard time hearing it.
Deb, hum.
All
Yeah,
right.
are you hum a verse? Very good. Now count from 1 to 5 out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't have to move your eyes anymore. We did that already. And then hum again, okay? Oh, good. Tapping on the top of the head again, okay? These negative energies are rising. Okay, eyebrow point, train shooting in Brooklyn. Side of the eye, 31 bullets, 21 people injured. Beneath the eye, moved away from the city to get away because I felt trapped. Underneath the nose, and COVID made me feel trapped. On the chin point, moved away, felt trapped. Collarbone. And now, even after I moved away, the news is reminding me of the horrible things that can happen in the city. And it's not just New York City. Right? Underneath the arm, there was a school shooting someplace. These shootings happen all the time. This almost seems to be no place to be safe. So, Deb, when we tap on the side, make sure you're 4 inches below the middle of your armpit there. That's it, in there. I couldn't see with your coat on, okay? And then just tap one more time to reiterate what it is that we were tapping about. Even though I still feel the stress, just thinking about the train shooting, and it reminds me of lots of other things that I was impacted by. I deeply and completely accept myself. Hands over your heart space and take a breath. Okay? And just notice now that when you think about that, those energies that are moving, are they doing anything differently?
Oh my God, there's a whole vibration taking place.
Yeah, there's mobility of energy that's moving.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a good
moving.
vibration route, right?
Good
As opposed to,
vibration.
okay, all
A
right.
really
So
good one. Yeah.
we didn't fix the fact that some madman shot up a train in Brooklyn, and that these things can happen. But you're noticing the energetic shift.
Totally.
Yeah, so you can actually think about that event or not think about that event,
Yeah.
and it's going to just bother you a lot less.
Yes.
Now, it could be that event was so bothersome to you because there might be a lot of other things that are tied to that in your mind that were very, very distressing. And we don't have the time today to go over that. But the fact that you feel differently is really the whole point of doing EFT. It's not just to feel differently, it's to know that the things that are impacting us, we just can't put our mind, wrap our mind around it and solve the problem, because the problem is neurologically wired into the nervous system, and that's where it affects the way we think and the way we feel and our overall stress level. So as soon as we get stressed by anything, we might want to tap. Quickie story. I was pretty impacted by World Trade Center, you know, and the news just had it, boom, man, those airplanes flying in and out of those things. And it was very, very distressing. And of course I tapped on it, but it was very, very distressing. And I wanted to pay homage to all the people who died by sitting myself down on one of the anniversaries, maybe even 10 years later, of September 11th, of 9/11. And I knew it could be traumatizing, but what I did was I forced myself to sit through the whole ceremony, tapping the entire time. So now, when out of curiosity or when other events come up, I mean, it was a thing that happened. It traumatically affected most of us, if not all of us. So I can watch videos of the planes flying into the World Trade Center and the Trade Center is falling down without re-experiencing the same level of trauma. Doesn't mean it wasn't a horrible, terrible thing. It means that I can actually expose myself to it without feeling the same disturbance that this is too difficult to watch. And that's how I was able to change my neurology around that. Okay. So when we have things that are too difficult for us and we want to avoid them, or we can't help but avoid them and they're too stressful, remember that stress is something that causes us to go into a distressed state, a dysfunctional state, and there's aspects of our health, our mind-body health, our mental health, our psychological health, our physiological health that is being impacted by the stress. So if we recognize that we're being stressed, we can start tapping immediately, and that will bring the stress response down. And the more we do that on more things, the more we're going to eradicate the underpinnings of those stress, which might be traumatic events, to the point where we're able to deal a little bit easier, free from the constant onslaught of things that might stress us out. And then we build resilience and we learn coping mechanisms, and hopefully we live better, more functional lives because we're not allowing those levels of distress to take us out of balance so much. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, it's all tied in
Right.
together.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on this call. And if it's recorded, I guess we have to check with Barbara if it's okay to share the recording at some point.
Yeah, the
If
recording.
anybody doesn't want to be, you know, out there.
Oh, yeah. Is everybody okay if I put this
media land.
recording up or?
Otherwise,
Okay.
otherwise we won't. But
I'm
it would,
fine.
it might be a useful lesson if anybody wants to revisit it, or people who couldn't make it, we might be able to share the video. Any
Yeah,
other
and I
further
think
thoughts,
next
questions, or
time-
comments?
I think next time it would be good to do a kind of a different strategy of a collective tapping like we did tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But again, from personal experience, I found this very helpful.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And
I
thank you,
appreciate it.
Steve.
And thank you, Deb, for sharing that. How about other folks? Does anybody notice when they think about their distressing events, that did the tapping seem to move anything or make you more aware of anything?
It did for me, and I also was a huge piece to know that the stress response doesn't have to directly immediately reflect back. It's a mechanism, and
Yes.
I've done a lot of tapping with some people, and I never really got that piece. So thank you. I did not.
Wonderful.
Get that piece
That's awesome,
before.
Kim.
I did
Thank you
not.
so much.
Thanks.
It is amazing. I can.
All right.
vouch.
Lisa, any thoughts, questions you want to share?
Yeah, I also felt like my stress was diminished by doing the group tapping.
Yeah, good.
So
Good.
thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your energy.
Mm,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely, my pleasure. And again, let's
Thank you,
Barbara know
Barbara.
if if you want to do things like this on a more regular basis, I'm happy to facilitate this.
Yeah, I think we
Thank
should
you.
do it again. And if they want to get a hold of you, Steve, I'll put it up in the chat. What's the best way to?
Yeah, okay. Does everybody have access to the chat?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And my sticky mouse is creating a problem here.
Oh,
Uh,
I'll type it, Steve.
Here's my website.
Isn't it on the invite that you sent to us?
I
Oh, is
heard, I hope it was, but I don't remember if it was or not. It's Empower Your True Self. .com, and the email would be empoweryourtrueself@gmail.com. Just exactly those 4 words put together. Empower your true self @gmail.com. Thanks. And that pops you to my website, my old website, and the website's got contact information there. If you want to email me or call me.
And guys,
For
let me
any
know-
reason, if anybody was particularly distressed by anything we did today and needs a little extra tapping help, I'm obviously happy to provide that. And if this opened up a doorway for you to examine what you think is unresolved problems that you want help with, I'd be
Yeah.
happy to talk with anybody about how we can go about working together to resolve those problems.
And if you
Thank
guys
so
want to do,
much.
oh,
I was
Okay?
just
Yes,
saying,
thank you.
thank you so
We're all
much.
good?
This was great.
Thank you so much,
Barbara.
guys.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Stephen.
Go in peace.
You too.
thank you so much. And guys,
Thank
let me
you,
know if you
guys.
want to
Thanks,
do this
thanks.
again. And
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Together. Thanks,
We should
guys.
definitely all
Thank
do it
you.
again.
Lots of
Good
love.
night. Good night, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Bye, Kim.
Goodbye. Bye. Great to see
Kim,
you.
Kim,
Yes.
good night.
Oh, I miss you.
I missed you after seeing you tonight. You're so cute.
Oh my God. Nice to see you.
You too.
This is
You
great.
too.
I'm exhausted and I haven't eaten, so I'm going to go do that.
Bye-bye. Mwah. Love you, sweetie.